My name is Estelle Radcliffe. At my cousin's wedding, my own father planted his hand against the door and spat the same words he'd carved into me my whole life. You don't belong here. The guests froze. The sting wasn't new, but hearing it out loud, in front of everyone, was the cut deepest of all. Charleston glowed that afternoon, magnolias perfuming the air as guests in designer suits and silk gowns drifted toward the grand entrance of the country club. The string quartet's notes floated over the marble steps, blending with the easy laughter of people who had never once felt unwelcome in a room. I stepped forward, steady, my heels clicking against stone, carrying nothing more than a simple purse and the gold chain at my throat that once belonged to my mother. Before I could reach the open doorway, his figure filled the frame. My father, pressed into a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, glass of bourbon poised in one hand as if it were an extension of his authority. The smile he had been wearing for senators and CEOs only moments before curdled the instant his eyes caught mine. He shifted, planting his free hand flat against the polished wood of the door, barring the way as though I were a trespasser. The quartet faltered, bowstrings slipping, conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned, someone whispered too loudly, "Isn't that Radcliffe's daughter?" Another guest, emboldened by champagne, chuckled under his breath. The glow of cell phone screens flared as a few people angled their cameras, eager to capture humiliation dressed as family drama. My father's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as broken glass. His words weren't just for me, they were staged for the crowd, a performance designed to reaffirm who held the power. A hot flush crept up my neck, not from shame, but from recognition. I had been here before, not in this ballroom, but in countless moments of my life where his hand, literal or otherwise, pressed against the doorway and marked me as less. I drew in a long breath, the chain at my throat warming against my skin, and for the first time in years, I did not lower my eyes. Memories broke over me like a storm, unrelenting and sharp. I grew up in a sprawling wooden house in New Mexico, its long hallways cold, its rooms so orderly they felt suffocating. Silence there was not peace but control, the kind that weighed down on you until even breathing seemed loud. My father built his world around my brother, polishing him like a trophy, praising every mock trial, every line of legal precedent he memorized. That was the Radcliffe way, the law, the name, the legacy. And then there was me, the daughter who was never enough. I still hear his voice, low and certain. Books don't win cases. Estelle, power does. To him, I was a misstep in the family's march toward prestige. My mother was the only warmth in that house. When illness overtook her, she clung to life while my father studied bills and shook his head. His concern was for cost, not comfort. I was still a teenager, scraping together what little I earned tutoring and working weekends, slipping it quietly into the pile of invoices. Those payments bought her a few more precious months, time for whispered stories and half smiles between treatments. But when she was gone, the house froze over completely. He did not mourn aloud, he did not weep. He looked at me instead, as though my presence itself was an offense. "Don't embarrass this family," he said, a verdict more final than the burial itself. In that moment, I understood. Grief would not be shared, and neither would love. The day I chose to leave, his laughter trailed after me like smoke. "You'll wash out in a week." I carried those words into the mud, into the rain, into the endless drills where every muscle screamed and sleep was a rumor. I clung to them not as prophecy, but as fuel. Each step, each climb, each night I refused to quit. I sharpened myself against the stone of his doubt. The years stacked one on another, stripes on my sleeve, stars on my shoulder, marks no Radcliffe had ever dreamed of. My father never saw them. He made sure no one else did either. Invitations to family dinners vanished. Announcements of milestones never reached me. I became a ghost in their gatherings, a story rewritten, the one who chose distance, the one who abandoned them. In truth, I was the one abandoned. Still, I carried on. My honor was not tethered to their table, but to the men and women who trusted me with their lives. They were my family in every way that mattered. And yet, even as I stood at the head of commands, the wound bled quietly inside me, the severing of blood ties by the very man who should have stood guard at the door, not barred it. Charleston shimmered under chandeliers and garlands of jasmine that filled the country club with perfume. Inside, the air was thick with money and politics, laughter rising in polished tones as senators, judges, and businessmen clasped hands. My father moved among them like a candidate on the campaign trail, his grin wide, his voice booming. "The Radcliffe name stands stronger than ever," he declared, as though the evening itself had been staged to prove it. I lingered at the edges, where the waitstaff slipped past with trays of champagne. No seat card bore my name. In the official registry of guests, I did not exist. Yet I had come, not because of him, but because of the bride, my cousin, who had called me in secret only nights before. Her voice had broken through static, trembling. "Please, Estelle, you've always been my sister. I need you there." From where I stood, I could see clearly what my father was weaving. This wedding was no celebration of love to him. It was a contract, a merger, a way to tie Radcliffe pride to Lancaster influence, that old dynasty with roots sunk deep into Washington. To him, it was a ticket to the tables where power carved the world, and to guard that ticket, he would erase me completely. My presence threatened the illusion he had built. My heart beat steadily as I walked toward the hall, heels clicking against the marble floor. I knew the collision was inevitable. Some doors could not be avoided. They had to be opened, even if someone tried to slam them shut. The music faltered, the violin bow trembling as my father's arm shot out across the doorway. His voice struck like a gavel. "She's no Radcliffe. She's a shame to this family." The ripple of whispers spread instantly. A woman in pearls lifted her hand to her mouth. A man nearby smirked, shaking his head. Someone muttered, "Isn't she the one who left?" And the words landed like stones against my ribs. Phones glowed as screens angled, eager for spectacle. I drew breath to speak, but before my voice could rise, the groom turned. His eyes landed on me, and for a heartbeat he seemed not to believe what he saw. The color drained from his face, his lips parted. "General Radcliffe! Ma'am!" His voice cracked with shock, almost reverence. The room froze. A fork clattered to the marble, the sound echoing through silence. Every head turned. From the back row, a frail man with a cane pushed himself upright. His hand rose in salute, his voice steady despite age. "We know who you are, General." His eyes shone wet. A soldier recognizing another. Others followed. Nods spread. Hushed voices carried my name like a current. The tide had shifted. My father stood rigid, his jaw tight, his knuckles whitening against the doorframe. The control he had gripped all evening slipped like water through his hands. Yet in his eyes, a spark of defiance burned, rage poised for one more strike. The whispers rolled through the hall like a rising tide. The groom's words had barely settled when my father snapped back, his face flushed red, bourbon sloshing dangerously in his glass. "Don't be fooled. It's just a costume she parades in. Nothing more." The silence that followed was louder than any applause. His attempt at mockery fell flat, his voice dangling in the air with no place to land. The groom straightened, his back rigid, his voice ringing with command. "Sir, with all respect, General Radcliffe has earned every star on her shoulder." His words cracked through the hush, and suddenly the room was listening not to my father, but to him, from the aisle. A woman with silver hair rose slowly, her black dress trembling as she stepped forward. Her hand, fragile but firm, closed over mine. "My husband served under you. He always said you saved his life." The crowd gasped. No rumor could rival the gravity of lived testimony. Across the room, I saw the shift. A senator I recognized from television narrowed his eyes at my father. A businessman who had once laughed beside him now looked away in disgust. They were men who had built their reputations on reverence for service, and in that moment, my father's words exposed him as hollow. Then the aisle broke open. My cousin, veil flowing behind her, could no longer contain herself. She burst forward, tears streaking her cheeks, and threw her arms around me. "I knew you'd come. You're my family." The sound of her sobs cracked the room wide open. My father stiffened, his composure unraveling. He looked as though he were drowning in plain sight, with no lifeline left to grab. The quartet fell silent altogether, boughs hanging mid-air. The groom raised his glass high, his voice carrying with deliberate clarity. "Today isn't just a wedding. It's the honor of welcoming General Estelle Radcliffe, one of the finest leaders the Air Force has ever seen." The effect was instant. Guests pushed back their chairs and rose to their feet. Applause thundered against the vaulted ceiling. Veterans in the crowd saluted in unison, the sharp gesture slicing the air with reverence. Respect rippled outward, a wave too strong to resist. My father tried to interject, his knuckles white around the stem of his glass. His mouth opened, but the roar of applause drowned him out. He faltered, taking a step back, his presence shrinking to the margins of a stage he thought he owned. Then a child's voice pierced through the noise. A small boy tugged at his mother's dress, his words bright and unguarded. "Is she really a general?" The question sliced deeper than any accusation. Every gaze swung back to me. I did not answer with words. I simply held the boy's curious eyes, let a faint smile touch my lips, and stayed silent. That silence carried more weight than any speech I could give. In that instant, it was undeniable. The authority in the room had slipped entirely from my father's grasp and settled firmly on mine. And though the battle wasn't over, the outcome was already beginning to take shape. The applause did not fade quickly. It crashed and lingered, punctuated by the scrape of chairs as more guests rose to their feet, the weight of their respect filling every corner of the ballroom. I stayed still, steady, allowing the swell to pass through me like a tide. I hadn't come to seize attention, yet the moment wrapped itself around me, undeniable. My father, once the axis around which every family gathering spun, shrank under the chandelier's glow. He stood there, bourbon trembling in his hand, the amber liquid trembling like it feared spilling his secret weakness to the marble floor. A few drops splattered anyway, dark against the pale stone, and he fumbled as if those stains might mark him forever. When the clapping began to ease, he forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. His voice scraped across the silence. "She thinks wearing a uniform makes her someone important." But no one laughed with him. The dismissal, sharp and practiced in private, lost all its power in public. His words fell flat, and the room, this room he had curated, filled with allies, clients, and men he worshipped, did not rally to him. Every face turned toward me instead, waiting, weighing. For the first time in my life, the silence was mine. Not imposed on me, not used to erase me, but mine to hold. I let it breathe, let him feel the void he had created. Then I spoke. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough to cut. "Respect isn't bought. Dad, it's earned." The words cracked the air. They needed no echo. The statement was simple, final. His grip faltered, the glass tilting, and I saw in his eyes the recognition that he had been judged, not by me alone, but by every witness in that hall. No applause followed, no triumphant cheers. Instead, a heavier verdict descended. Silence. Silence that pressed into the marble and wood. Silence that carried the truth louder than any roar. It was the silence of people who had already chosen a side, who no longer believed in the man standing at the doorway with nothing left to command. My father lowered his glass at last, his shoulders hunched, his shadow curling small beneath the chandelier's light. For decades, he had wielded arrogance like a weapon, but in that moment, it slipped from his grasp, and in the stillness that followed, the only power left was the dignity he could no longer deny me. The ballroom still hummed with chatter and clinking glasses, but I slipped out into the night air. lungs hungry for something other than perfume and champagne. The veranda stretched wide, lined with white columns, and the scent of magnolia drifted on the salt wind rolling in from Charleston Harbor. I leaned on the railing, letting the cool air press against my skin, until the door creaked open behind me. My father stepped out. No entourage trailing him now, no glass in hand to steady his performance. The grandeur had drained from his shoulders. He looked older, smaller, like the suit that fit him so perfectly, hours earlier, had begun to hang loose. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice rasped, cracked by something I had rarely heard in it before: uncertainty. I built walls against my own daughter. I turned, measuring him. His eyes, once sharp with calculation, flickered in the shadows like a man finally seeing what he had destroyed. He swallowed hard and went on. All my life, I thought the measure of a man was how high he climbed, how much he could hold in his fists: money, status, applause. I told myself I was protecting this family, but all I did was break it. I chose the wrong ruler, Estelle, and I know I can't erase the years. But can I start again? The question hung in the humid air, fragile and heavy at once. I studied him, this man who had towered over me all my life, who had silenced me with a glance, who had taught me shame like it was a family tradition. Now, he stood hollowed out, his voice frayed, his plea trembling. I could have let him sit in that silence, but there was one truth I had carried too long to keep buried any longer. I stepped closer, steady, my own words sharp as glass. Do you remember all those scholarships you boasted about? The community centers, the clinics, the programs plastered with the Radcliffe name? He blinked, caught off guard. Of course! They were my contributions, my legacy. I shook my head. They were mine! Every dollar came from my pension, from years of paychecks I earned in uniform. I gave quietly, without asking for credit, because I believed good work didn't need a spotlight. While you paraded them as trophies, I funded them in silence. For a moment, he didn't move. The night stilled around us. Then the weight of my words landed, and his face slackened. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no defense came. His eyes, for the first time in memory, glistened wet. I never knew, because I never wanted to ask. The admission cracked through him like lightning splitting stone. He rubbed a trembling hand across his forehead, shoulders heaving under the collapse of decades of arrogance. The man who had once claimed the world, bent to his will, now stood before me, undone. Exposed not by enemies or rivals, but by the daughter he had spent a lifetime dismissing. The magnolia blossoms stirred in the breeze, sweet and sharp, like memory itself. I let his words settle between us, not rushing to fill the silence. Sometimes truth didn't need an echo, it only needed witnesses. And tonight, beneath the Charleston stars, he was finally witnessing mine. The reception had swelled into laughter and clinking glasses when my father rose from his chair. The chatter hushed, one ripple at a time, until his voice carried through the hall. It wavered at first, but steadied as he went on. I confused wealth with worth, image with honor. Tonight, I learned dignity isn't bought, it's earned, and I owe my daughter an apology. No applause followed. No one dared disturb the gravity of that moment. The silence was heavier than thunder, yet it carried a quiet respect deeper than cheers could ever reach. Faces softened, eyes lowered. The room itself seemed to bow under the weight of his confession. Then he turned toward me, shoulders sagging, hand extended, trembling slightly. Will you dance with your old man? I hesitated, not because I doubted him, but because the gesture was so foreign it startled me. Still, I placed my hand in his. The band struck up a slow jazz standard, the kind my mother used to hum when she cooked Sunday dinners. At first, he was clumsy, stepping on my foot once, fumbling with rhythm. But then we both laughed, real, unguarded laughter. and something fragile began to knit itself back together. The chandelier cast golden light across us as we moved, and I caught glimpses of guests watching, not with curiosity, but with reverence. To them, it must have looked like a small miracle, an old wound daring to close. I leaned closer and whispered, "From here, Dad. Only from here." The night closed with music that lingered in the rafters, the sound of quiet laughter, and the startling realization that revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's simply standing tall in your own dignity, long enough for the truth to light the room on its own.